Okay, welcome to See How They Run. Thank you for joining us. As always, I want to express my appreciation to Jim and Ellie Monroe for serving as co-host and technical coordinators for today's class. This course is about how governmental power is transferred in the American Republic. This class is not about who should be elected, but rather about how candidates are elected. The views I express are my own, based on my information sources, my background, my education, and nonpartisan political professional career, and my life experiences. As always, I encourage you to use the information and commentary presented in this class as only one of many information sources to help you be an informed citizen of this great country. Today is Tuesday, August 13th. It is 10 a.m. in the morning. Election day is only 3 weeks away, and voting in most states is underway. More than 11 million Americans have cast their ballots, up from 1.6 million at the same time in 2016. Over 250,000 of Californians have already cast their ballots. Here's the big picture and see how they run as I see it since our last class 2 weeks ago. On many levels, Mr. Trump has had his worst 2 weeks in the 2020 election cycle. And most Americans, according to polls, believe his setbacks are of his own making. Still, we need to put this period of the campaign in perspective. The president has suffered what appears to be a 3% or 3 percentage point decline in his re-election prospects. That's the equivalent of one Trump voter in 70 changing to Mr. Biden. The final 3 weeks of the campaign will provide an intensity that can change the direction of the campaign. It did 4 years ago. At this point, the preference of most American voters are unlikely to change. What is now critical in the presidential campaign is late breaking undecided voters or weakly affiliated voters with one candidate or the other, and how many voters of each of these segments will actually vote. In 2012, Mitt Romney was convinced he would beat President Obama because of historically reliable survey methodology used by the Romney campaign. What campaign posters underestimated was an African-American turnout that exceeded white voters for the first time in recorded American history. With 21 days to go, additional October surprises must be expected. More COVID outbreaks and hotspots could be one. The administration is nearing an announcement on a new arms control deal with Russia. Attorney General Barr may still issue indictments before Election Day or make an announcement on his investigation of the Obama administration investigation of the Russian role in the American election and Mr. Trump's role. Mr. Trump is tweeting about speeding up troop withdrawals from Afghanistan and the Mideast. And there are October unknown unknowns that can happen, created by nature, international competitors and adversaries, economic shocks. We will begin and end our discussion today on the process of voting. In between, we have many topics to explore. Stay with me for a review of the past 2 weeks and where we are headed. This is See How They Run. Trump and the election of 2020. I voted last Wednesday. I voted at a ballot collection box. Consequently, I'm one of the 11,288,000 Americans who've already voted. This is a map produced by the American Voting Project. It shows you where ballots of the number of ballots in terms of colored coding that's already occurred in America. Look at the number just in Florida. In fact, upwards of 938,000 senior adults have already voted in Florida. 938,000. How does that compare to the same time last year? I mean, 4 years ago, 77,000. 77,000 4 years ago, 938,000 this year. 4 years ago, that segment went overwhelmingly for Mr. Trump. This year, polls suggest a slight edge for Mr. Biden. How that 11 million ballots have been cast, we don't know how people voted, but we do know their registration. We know that that in 5 states in which in states in which we know the registration information, we don't in the other half of the states with information. So far, Democrats are outvoting Republicans. This is where I voted. I voted by going to a ballot collection box, the single ballot collection box in my city that was adjacent to my library, my community library, and cast my ballot by dropping it in. In Orange County, over 1.7 million ballots have been sent out to voters. Orange County on the official Orange County website on the vote, ocvote.com, indicates the 3 ways that voting in all counties, but particularly in Orange County, is being conducted. You can go, like I did, to a ballot drop box. You can go to a voting center and drop off the ballot, a designated voting center, or you can drop your ballot into the mail, and postage is prepaid. Remember, in many past elections, you had to put on postage. Now, since this is an all-mail election, M-A-I-L election, that you do not need to do that. The website OC Vote has the information on where the ballot box locations are. This is just one example in Fullerton. 5 different ones as of the other day when I checked. Vote centers that are open during particular hours starting October 30th, not open yet. There are several locations in the Fullerton area as well. The state also has a service in which you can track if your ballot has been received, officially received for voting. I received this saying that mine had been received. Hello, Michael Stover. This is a message from San Bernardino County Registrar of Voters. Your ballot for the 2020 general election was received and will be counted. Thank you for voting. So let me ask you, we'll just have a short item. Have you voted? If not, when are you plan to vote? Which form of voting do you plan to use? By mail, drop-off box, or voting center? This is, I could do a raising of hands, but just get some people talking. Just Deborah.
I dropped my ballot at a ballot drop box in Anaheim at the Arctic Transportation Center, and there was no one there when I got there. And I think the big problem in Texas is the counties. Many of the counties in Texas are gigantic.
Yes.
So getting to a drop box in some of those counties is it So it's pretty sad that it's obviously voter suppression.
It can be an hour drive, or in the county that includes Houston. It's 4th largest city in America, and there's only one one location. Okay, we'll come back to this topic later on when we talk about the controversy over voting, but I just wanted to start it with the fact that we are indeed in the period in which voting is occurring. So what's been the big news? Wow, has there been big news? Wow, has there been big news? President came down with COVID, was in the hospital, came out of the hospital, received experimental drugs, may have picked up the virus during an event at the White House in which people sat very close together, many without mask, at an event that Dr. Fauci talked about as a super spreader type of event. While he didn't want to get in the controversy with the White House, he was very clear on in characterizing the type of event. And we know that so many people who attended that event came down with the virus. Almost a decapitation of the American government to some degree, at least in terms of the West Wing of the White House. Most asymptomatically. The president and Chris Christie seemed to be the ones that had the more profound or serious cases, though we don't know for sure on the other ones because of their right to privacy. But after that event, many of the attendees at the event in the Rose Gardens announcing the nomination of Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court, they went home to 20 different states. One to Riverside County, a very charismatic pastor came back and announced that he had COVID. He found out he had COVID. That event, if indeed it was the transmittal mechanism to the president or the West Wing, certainly didn't help the president's political prospects. Because it re-emphasized this issue at a time in which the president wanted to move on to other issues. The fact that the White House refused to contact the Centers for Disease Control, or at least that's what the news media is reporting, to trace people who attended seems to be an extraordinary breach too. So we had October surprise number 2. Number 1 was the Supreme Court vacancy. And how it was handled was not something that would inspire confidence. And of course, the president's distractors had a field day. If that was not enough, then we had the whole scene at Walter Reed Hospital. In something that seemed like it was scripted at times out of Saturday Night Live, all the president's doctors talking about how the president was progressing and retracting things they said the previous day because they didn't want the president to be discouraged in his prognosis, did not lend to a whole lot of confidence in the system. But it does show, I think, fairly strongly to the president's opponents that it's good to be a powerful or rich person because you can have as many doctors as you like, as many doctors, as much experimental treatments. You can bring in the specialists from around the country, indeed around the world. Even the Wall Street Journal, which tries to keep the best case forward for the president, and on its editorial pages, had problems with the messaging by the president's doctors. In most countries in the world where the leader came down with COVID, and there's been several countries in which that's been the case, that leader has received a bounce in popularity, sometimes just a short-time bounce, but almost always a bounce. So far, it appears the president has not only not received a bounce in favorability, he's received it just in the opposite direction. Coming back to the White House and dramatically stripping off his mask, I guess was designed to show his strength and his endurance. But to some, and certainly to his opponents, it seemed like sending a gigantic mixed message to the American people that you do not have to take the precautions advocated by a Surgeon General, by the Centers for Disease Control, by the National Institutes of Health seriously. You can take off your mask. The president talked about how this was a blessing from God to get the virus and to survive it. If that was a blessing from God, God hasn't been talking to the American people, because the polls that have been conducted in some key battleground states show that the president's behavior to the respondents to the poll is the president was setting a bad example. So what do you think? Do you think his experience getting COVID and recovering from COVID has been what appears to be a net minus to him? Why don't you think he got the sympathy bounce? And do you think the statements by the doctors helped his cause? Is there something being missed? Is the media overemphasizing this issue?
I heard something very interesting this morning, and that was Trump had planned to put a Superman sweatshirt or t-shirt on underneath his jacket, so that when he got to the White House, he could dramatically take off his jacket and have a big Superman shirt on. Fortunately, he was talked out of that. But I'm beginning to wonder if he ever really had the virus. He could have had pneumonia. He could have had another kind of lung something. But this miraculous recovery leaves me very questionable. And I just wonder if this whole thing hasn't been a hoax. And that's why the immediate wonderful recovery. But I think a Superman thing, I'm glad they talked him out of it, but that's just another example.
Thank you, Pat. I think we can take the last hand.
May I make a comment on that, please?
Sure.
May I make a comment? I noticed that he's acted very sporadic, and I think we also need to make note of the fact that cortisone shots of any type will make you feel like Superman. Prednisone, all those different hormonal type of medications, that's what they do. You know, they make you feel no pain at all. So, and it makes you feel like you can conquer the world. And I think that's really part of what he's going through right now. That's not his defense, by the way, guys. I mean, that's something he probably would have normally said, but just to keep in mind, though, that he's worse than he normally is.
You might have recalled too, like just last week, there was a vice presidential debate. It was certainly a more traditional debate than the first presidential debate of this cycle. Candidates were doing what they normally do in debates, not answering the question that was asked of them, going back to the previous question that they had answered that wasn't really in response to the moderator's question, but it seemed almost normal. Still, coronavirus was at the forefront of the debate, which keeps an issue that doesn't break well to the president in the forefront of this campaign. Whether or not Kamala Harris did the best debate, and there has been controversy on that. Some expert commentators who were more of a neutral in terms of their perspective on the election thought that Vice President Pence and his background as a talk show host in Indiana really helped him deal with the sit-down nature of this debate. But I don't think his interrupting of Kamala Harris helped him with the so-called soccer moms in the suburban rings around the metropolitan centers that the Trump campaign is aiming to attract. The moderator, again, was two moderators, and now the second moderator that was criticized after the fact about not doing a good job. But unlike Mr. Wallace, Ms. Page thought she actually did do a good job. So who won the debate? Well, if you do it on debate points, it's, you could go to the expert panels, and I think there's at least either a lean to Mr. Pence or more of a neutral. Both sides did what they needed to do. But be asked the people who were actually viewing it and doing it in a panel discussion before and after, you find that Ms. Harris, Senator Harris, did well. But who could have expected this to happen? 2 minutes of a fly on the top of a very well coiffed hair, and I admire that, but I don't admire the fly. And the fly had obviously was not of Vice President Pence's desire, but that distracted a lot of attention during one part of the debate. Let's move on. There was going to be a debate on Thursday. The debate commission said, okay, if the president's up to it, but we're going to do it virtually. The president rejected that out of hand. And then the commission said, okay, we'll cancel the debate. The president now is calling for that debate to be put back on in the format originally designed without being virtual. That's not obviously going to happen. And both candidates are talking about going on national networks now and doing their own versions of town halls. Mr. Biden is already booked on ABC, and the president, I think, is negotiating, maybe already is inked, going on to NBC for a town hall. So they'll have different channels networks to view them. Kind of weird. Of course, there was also the presidential debate we didn't cover. That's happened during our last 2 weeks. We had a lot happen in 2 weeks, didn't we? And that, of course, was the debate from hell. I think all sides could say that was a debate from hell. Chris Wallace lost control. It probably was impossible for people to control. It turned a trading of insults at times. Frequent interruptions. Mr. Biden's comment at one point, I think, kind of was what many viewers were thinking at that time. The news media, generally on both sides, such as the Wall Street Journal, talked about a depressing debate spectacle. And this is also from the Wall Street Journal editorial. The benign explanation for the president's performance is that, like other incumbents in their first debates, he was overconfident and underprepared, but he was so scattershot with his answer that he rarely offered a sustained case for his own policy. When Mr. Biden said Mr. Trump had called veterans suckers and losers, Mr. Trump didn't refute it, but brought up Hunter Biden. Mr. Wallace had a hard task as the two men brawled, but he didn't help by interjecting himself too much in the debate. His verbose questioning often took one side of the issue. This is from the Wall Street Journal perspective, as if playing gotcha in his interview program, when the point should have been to solicit information to help voters. When pollsters asked the question, how did that debate make you feel? The number one feeling was annoyed. Second one was entertained. There's a lot of people that watch the Ultimate Fighting Machines, or wrestling. How about making you feel better about Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump? Well, Mr. Biden seemed to score well on that. And that may be because not only of the nature of their respective performances, but because Mr. Biden had more supporters coming into the debate than Mr. Trump. And that is that is a loss for Mr. Trump if he didn't pick up people coming out of the debate. Some media says Mr. Biden won just by simply surviving the onslaught. Others say Mr. Trump lost because he couldn't stay focused. He is undisciplined in message management and consequently can't sustain a number of punches, but keeps going between different issues. But who lost? Well, to international viewers of debates, the American democracy looked really poor. This is the way we choose our leaders. This is the forum we provide for voters to compare one to the other. Is this the way that our election process can't be trusted, as was suggested by the president, that the system can't be trusted, that maybe, the votes that are being cast are suspect. Some, like the Economist magazine from the UK, said, is this the end of the debate, of this type of debate? And they raise some good points. The Wall Street Journal took another view. It said, well, what we really need is a debate without moderators. Just let them go after each other. Just let them go after each other, and somehow have some type of kill button after they let them interrogate each other by asking the questions of the other party, and then allowing that person to answer without interruption. Interesting concept, kind of somewhat of a traditional debate. And of course, this alone would have been the big issue of the year, except for all the others. The Supreme Court confirmation hearings started yesterday and are continuing today, and will continue tomorrow in terms of the questioning of Judge Barrett. It was intended to be appropriately distanced. You can see where people had to stand or sit in the hearing room, and several senators literally called it in, but called it in with a purpose to avoid being infected by taking part in the hearing. Democrats and Republicans in their opening statements yesterday and Judge Barrett kind of stayed pretty much where you thought they would be. President got frustrated watching the hearings yesterday. At first, he said he was going to be too busy with the job of being president to watch. And then he watched and said there shouldn't be actual hearings, just to go to the vote. Just go to the vote. But so many of the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee are up for election. That's going to be hard just to go to look at this other than through a partisan campaign orientation. And several of them, particularly Republicans, are in crucial tests in which they might lose their seat. Judge Barrett did as what should be expected of judges to say. Judges shouldn't make policy that the legislative body of the government should be making. She said that her personal views don't interfere with her judicial opinions. Republican senators played down Judge Barrett's previous statements on reproductive rights. And today, Judge Barrett refused to say, citing judicial canons of ethics, that whether or not she would not participate, that is, recuse herself from the upcoming case on the Affordable Care Act or cases dealing with this election. Despite that fact, Democrats will push that issue, which will make it harder for her and the court's reputation if she does participate. Supporters of the president, such as the Wall Street Journal, said she should not recuse herself. It seems like the battle is being fought for the next battle, not for the confirmation battle. Senator McConnell hopes that the senators who are in, the Republican senators in close races will benefit from the discussion of Judge Barrett's nomination, believing that the constituent in those states will identify with Judge Barrett's as a successful female judge, scholar, and her judicial philosophy. We'll see. And the court certainly has a number of cases it will take up in the current term that will make whoever is in that court majority very consequential in the path forward in our country. The big issue of the day that Republicans wish to redirect this nomination fight about is whether or not if Democrats get control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, will they expand the court? Will they expand the court? Of course, the Court of Appeals have been expanded in the past years. District courts have been expanded in membership. Whether or not the Supreme Court should be expanded, as it has had in previous years, but not for a century. The lack of a good response by the Biden campaign to that question, Senator Biden said today that he's not a fan of expanding the court, but didn't take a firm position. And there's other big news issues, such as the president's tweets of his disappointments that the Attorney General hasn't indicted some of his political foes yet. Even the Wall Street Journal called him to task on that type of tweet. If for nothing else, it looks like anything that is done now will be done just for political purposes and not on its merits. And of course, over all of this is the continuing issue of the COVID-19 crisis. President seems to be at times campaigning against COVID as if it was a political opponent, rather than a disease to control and suppress. And thanks to his own illness, this issue is likely to dominate through at least the next 2 weeks, if not the entire remainder of the campaign. And as people vote, more than 1 million a day, rising probably to 3 or 4 million a day, that getting beyond the current crisis may be difficult. It's the president's supporters has put an out of context comment by Dr. Fauci in one of the ads for the president, and guess what? The doctor then said it was taken out of context. So it continues to put that issue before the voters instead of letting it move on to another issue in which the president might compete more favorably. The president wasn't helped by his FDA that basically has now made any formal approval of a vaccine for general use will not occur probably until January based upon the guidelines that they finally issued over the objections of the White House. But there is continuing leaks in the federal bureaucracy about how the White House has tried to reduce the public health measures to protect Americans. There's people say the president and Vice President Pence said, what's the difference between the Trump and Biden plan? Well, there's a number of sources that have put down a very detailed one indicating the difference between the two. And I encourage you to look at it if that is an issue of major concern. Well, what would Vice President Biden do if he was president? Both in the past, now, and in the future. Let's move on. We talked before, the number one issue usually in presidential campaigns is how well the economy is doing. Well, it's a mixed bag. The last jobs report before the election shows a slowdown in the recovery. Yes, 600,000 jobs were restored, but more than 10 million people are still out of work since February. The rate of increase in jobs is slowed down very, very much. And in most weeks, over 800,000 Americans are applying for the first time for jobless benefits. Major companies continue to announce major job cuts. Women are 4 times as likely as men to be unemployed now, because by the nature of how the economic recovery and the shutdown of the economy persists. The president advocated and increased his offer to Democrats for additional stimulus aid to $1.8 trillion. And that was, he then withdrew and then put back on the table, and then Senate Republicans objected to it. And the president then shifted to a different way of providing aid through smaller packages, and then went back to, well, maybe we'll propose more money than the Democrats are proposing. Senator McConnell said today, when the Senate comes back into session next Monday, he'll put something on the floor and see what happens in the US Senate. But it doesn't look like the president and his party are in agreement. The president and Speaker Pelosi may be in more agreement than the president and Senate Republicans, many of whom that are up for re-election in tough campaigns. So let's talk about all these developments. But let's talk about Judge Barrett or the economic package. Should a stimulus compromise be a priority to the president and to congressional Democrats, regardless of its political consequences? What I mean that is, who gains, who wins? Should the Senate's review of Judge Barrett be based exclusively on her qualifications, which seem to be extensive, and her judicial philosophy, which seems to be just one of several judicial philosophies? Or should it be based upon what the president said his nominees would be, and that is against Roe versus Wade Wade and for repealing the Affordable Care Act. Does anyone want to talk about these things?
You know, we all know that Trump is infamous for his lies. I mean, probably over thousands. Okay, so here they go in a debate with Kamala Harris and Pence, and darn it, she was caught lying. And now, I mean, I have some Trump supporters in my family, and they're just ha-ha-haing that, oh, you guys lie. The lie that I saw, because I looked it up after he said that, and it seems like she misrepresented the reference she made to Lincoln, that Lincoln did delay the nomination of a Supreme Court judge, but for other reasons, completely other reasons. So they're calling it a lie. Okay, I was very upset that I don't want the Democrats to be known for any lies. Thank you.
Let's look at quickly the battle for Congress and the U.S. Senate. The 538 election forecast model puts Democrats as heavily favored to win the majority in the House of Representatives, with pretty much the same majority as currently. The Cook political report has a similar forecast out within the last 40 hours, but with a slight gain in the Democratic majority in the House. Of course, so much of that majority is dependent upon a number of what could be very, very close races here in Orange County that still needs, that could go either way, and some Northern California races. Democrats could have a good night, but still lose 3 Democratic congressional seats in California, because some of these are really, really close at this point. And some are repeats of the same candidates running again, and will the results be similar or different in this presidential election year? In the U.S. Senate, the predictions model of 538.com is that Democrats are considered slight favorites to win control in the Senate. Can go either way. Democrats a slight favorite with a forecast of 51.1 seats. 50. It's hard. If Vice President Biden wins, and therefore Kamala Harris would be president of the Senate, then you only need 50 senators to control on the Senate. If and vice versa. So this is very close, down to a number of very close races. The Cook political report today put out a new forecast, or a new appraisal of where the race stand now. And they say 12 Republican seats up for election this time. Remember, a third of the Senate is up every 2 years, are closely competed for, 12 compared to 2 Democratic Senate seats. The 2 Democratic Senate seats can change according to Cook, and they think the seat in Alabama will flip to the Republican Senator Jones seat, and Senator Peters in Michigan is just barely ahead. I think one poll showed him just 2% ahead of his Republican rival in Michigan, where Vice President Biden is doing very well. Yet on the other hand, a number of Republican seats are either the Democrats are favored, or it's really too close to call. And what happens at the top of the ticket and the enthusiasm to the top in terms of voter turnout and the segments may very well decide those races. Some U.S. representatives and some senators are starting to who are affiliated with the Republican Party or our nominees of the Republican parties are starting to distance, not all of them, because they're afraid that they'll lose the Trump supporters and therefore have no chance of re-election. North Carolina looked like it was headed towards the Democratic ranks until the Democratic nominee was caught sexting to the wife of another person. And now that one is up in the air, or maybe beyond the reach of Democrats. It's still too close to call, but North Carolina gets down to sometimes the actual qualities of the candidate may decide the race, not necessarily what's happening in terms of partisan divisions. Look at these close races in Michigan and Iowa. Iowa, the Democratic challenger ahead, and in Michigan, the Democratic incumbent just barely holding on. And Senator Graham is in the fight of his career in South Carolina of all states. His opponent has been very successful in apparently, according to media reports, in the debates held so far and in raising money. And in Georgia, 2 seats are up. And under the Georgia system, if no one gets 50%, that is, third parties and write-ins obscure the factor, that election may not be decided until January through a runoff. In California, of course, the election, October 19th, last day to register to vote. I was noted in the chat room that the Orange County voting centers will open on October 30th. Again, I would say check the Orange County registrar website for the actual, to verify all dates. This is from the Secretary of State. The last date to register to vote is October 9, but you can conditionally register even closer to Election Day. What about some of the down ballot races? Well, one, the Sacramento Bee newspaper yesterday reported that upwards of 4 Republican state Senate seats are competitive and could change to Democrats that already hold an overwhelming majority in the legislature, and particularly in the Senate. Currently, there are only 11 of the 40 state senators Republicans. If you get down to 7, you don't need a caucus room. You can just meet in almost in a closet, large closet, socially distanced closet. Fullerton and Los Alamitos have important races regarding taxation. But the race I think that makes me find most interesting is the race in LA County for DA, in which the incumbent DA is being challenged by the former DA of San Francisco, that is a former LA police official. Democrats that support, many prominent Democrats that originally supported the DA in the primary have now switched over to the DA's challenger in this nonpartisan race, in which parties can endorse him but are not. It's a nonpartisan race, and with lots of money coming in, mainly police union money and conservative money coming into the incumbent DA, and progressive sources and the money coming in through the challenger. Let's move on. Let me just move on from that. Let's talk a little bit more about the presidential election, and then end up on the controversy over voting itself. The Gallup organization made a survey recently, and they asked people what are the top issues, and they say the top issues are the economy being number 1, national security being number 2 in terms of being extremely important, but there's been very little about terrorism and national security in the media. The response to coronavirus, surprisingly number 3, but receiving the attention now. Nothing like coming down with COVID moves that up to the top of the media spectrum. Healthcare being a top one, and education being a top election issue. And that at the bottom of the election issues are such things as, well, let's talk about personal qualities. Does this personal quality apply to Trump or to Biden? Is likable. Doesn't apply to the president. Is honest and trustworthy. Relatively low for the president, only 4 out of 10 think the president is honest and trustworthy. Cares about the people, the needs of people like you. Like, Vice President Biden having an advantage there. Display good judgment and so forth. The president does get his best marks on is a strong and decisive leader. When you break it down between the Democrats and Republicans, you see those priority issues change. Healthcare is much more important to Democrats. Coronavirus much more. In other words, those are issues driving Democrats to vote. Race relations being very important. The economy being disproportionately important to Republicans, at least according to the Gallup poll. A different poll by the Pew organization asked, what about the candidates making good decision in economic policy, an issue in which Mr. Trump had a big lead in the past. Now it's basically tied between him and Mr. Biden. And with Biden with a very big lead in terms of handling public health impacts of the coronavirus and bringing the country closer together. 4 weeks ago, 538.com said the polls that were conducted, they had Mr. Biden up by 7. As of yesterday, Mr. Biden up by 10.6. That's a gigantic change. And when you consider that, generally speaking, the national polls are reduced by at least 3 percentage points for the swing states. And when you take into account some noise in the vote by mail system of maybe 1% or 2%, and you take into account maybe 1% for bashful Trump supporters, there's a big difference between 7 and 10. When you ask, as Pew did, well, how strongly do you support your guy, since they're both guys? Again, Mr. Trump has a lead there, strongly supports 68 to 57 for Mr. Biden, but you notice how Mr. Biden's number has come up. In terms of electoral college forecast, same number of states are in play as before. Key 3 swing states are still there, but the battleground, that is where the candidates are campaigning, has expanded. The president is now being forced to go back to states in which should be in the can by now, should be already locked up, like Ohio. Shouldn't have to be campaigning in Ohio 3 weeks prior to it. While Vice President Biden is honing in on battleground states such as Florida. The 538 prediction model now has Mr. Biden at an 86 out of 100 chance of prevailing if the election, based upon the current data as projected forward, holds true. That is that more than 8 out of 10 coin toss, Mr. Biden would win. That's a significant increase since the last time we looked at it. We looked at a number of swing states such as Nevada, a clear Biden lead. Biden was having problems there 2 weeks ago when we were last together. A clear lead in Michigan. North Carolina, this came out this morning. A narrow lead for Mr. Biden, but pretty good among high turnout voters, and pretty good among all voters. It's only a low turnout, which doesn't appear to be the case in this election cycle. So what can go wrong, or what can go not as predicted? You know, the 538 has a prediction model. What if you went outside that prediction model? What would you find? Well, there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. One, if Biden makes a strong Sun Belt breakthrough, that is, pick up Florida and Georgia and Texas, as well as Arizona, he could have an overwhelming electoral college win, 388 to 150. If Biden does well in the Rust Belt of Ohio and Minnesota and Michigan, he could have another blowout in electoral college, 359 to 179, even with a popular vote of only 8%. If Mr. Biden just continues to perform well among white college graduates, he could prevail, 290, and that is all boats rise across the nation in terms of his support just on that one demographic group. And if that demographic group overperformed. But Mr. Trump can prevail if Democrats have the same nightmare as before, losing the Midwest and not picking up any of the Sun Belt states. And Mr. Trump can prevail if he continues to make inroads significant inroads among non-whites. And any of those 5 strategies, not strategies, but outcomes, have to be considered according to the political report. They see those things as likely, not likely, but possible outcomes that could change the election. I want to get to the issue of the vote and spend some time on that, the election process. I'm going to skip way ahead and we'll come back to this. We'll be back next week in the Trump presidency, and we'll have a half-hour component on where the election stands. We'll spend the other hour on the Trump presidency, where the policies and of the administration. There's been a lot in the presidential and vice presidential debate and in the media accounts about the election process and the transfer of power. Would you accept the election results? And I think it is clear at this point that it is a strategy of the Trump campaign not to commit to accepting the election results. Now, that may be tactical rather than strategic, and that is basically saying that if, you know, in case we are forced again into an electoral college victory versus a popular vote, that we can defend the legitimacy of our election. Or if it's very close and forced into the House of Representatives, in which Republicans have a majority of 1 over Democrats based upon the current congressional delegation, and the current congressional delegations are the one that decided, not the new congressional delegations. But so this is going to be a big thing. And of course, we also have talked about before that because Democrats are showing such a preference to vote by mail, it is likely that many of the mail votes that arrive on election day won't be counted for weeks afterwards. And it will appear at first that Republicans have a lead for president and other congressional offices and other races. And then that lead would narrow and maybe even reverse itself within weeks. So the election. So what do we know about the election? Well, one, we know that that if this election is close, we will have an election crisis. Peggy Newton wrote very eloquently on why that will happen and why that is a bad thing, but it's very likely to happen. So let's remember the difference that is occurring across America now. Some states like California have changed from absentee or requested mail ballots to universal mail ballots. Universal mail ballots, you get a ballot if you're a registered voter. You don't get a ballot if you're not a registered voter. Though some in the president's camp have seemed to suggest that that is what will happen as a normal course, that it will not happen as a normal course of things. You have to be a registered voter. And voting by mail and absentee in the California system in the past, you had to ask to be able to vote that way. But once you vote that way in California, you continue to receive that subject to some limitations. There's another issue that makes this that you should be aware of, and that is some states allow their election officials, and almost always it's local election officials, to start processing the ballots early. You receive the ballot, you verify that it's the right person, usually almost always. I don't know of a state that doesn't do it by signature. And you can start processing that. In some states in which you put your ballot in an envelope that puts it in another envelope, we don't have that in California. We have what's known as a nude, N-U-D-E ballot. You put your ballot into the envelope. The states that can start processing early will be able to process those votes much faster and will probably clearly show the election trend by election night. In fact, Florida is one of those, and Florida is we're likely to know on election night how Florida goes because so many ballots would have been processed before the evening, before we reach midnight that evening. Some states allow voters and most states allow voters to see if their mail-in ballot or deposited ballot in a drop-off or voting center has reached the vote counting people in the registrar of voters offices and have been qualified for counting. California is one of those states now, but not all states have that, and consequently, some voters may not know if there was a problem with their ballot, such as a signature not matching a previous signature. Arizona was one of those in the past. No, Arizona is one of the states in which, and California is one of the states, if there is a problem with your ballot, if there is a problem, you'll have an opportunity to rectify that. Not surprisingly, there's errors in the system. Large systems involving millions of pieces of paper are likely to have problems. And consequently, errors the error rate can approach as high as 1%. In the state of California, 100,000 mail ballots in primaries had to be tossed because they did not meet the standards for return ballots, 100,000 just in California. And you have to sign the documents. You have to, you know, do it in the, you can only, you know, vote for one candidate. When it says vote for one, you can only vote for one. If you vote for two, it doesn't count. A lot of things that could disqualify a ballot. And the process itself in districts, elections, and overlapping overlapping districts, like a community college district with an elementary school district, with a sewer district, with a city, can make ballots very complicated to get right. Up in Yolo County, Northern California, in one area, mainly involving one multiple dwelling complex, 588 ballots were incorrectly having at least one of the elections that were up for contest wrong. And ballots get rejected most commonly for signature failures. We talked about the enclosed envelope versus the nude ballots. That's another problem in some of the states. So upwards of 1% of all ballots that are mailed in are disqualified, are tossed. Upwards of 1%. In an election in which you're voting by mail the first time, that error rate probably is going to be higher than 1. But we need to keep in mind that walk-in balloting also has its own problems. Across America, upwards of almost 1 million people in the 2016 election had problems voting, major problems voting. Some were as clear as not having the right ID. Others gave up because of long lines. Others with registrations didn't match. Now, the Supreme Court, usually within a month of the election, pretty much doesn't like to change the voting rules that are in existence. There's a rule of law that they use. It's a Supreme Court rule, but not a case, not a statute, that they basically allow what if an issue hasn't been resolved prior to the last 30 days, they tend to stay away from it. Tend. Sometimes they don't, but tend. For example, South Carolina will be allowed to require absentee ballots to have to be witnessed in order to be qualified. A judge appointed by Mr. Trump in Minnesota, however, allows the state of Minnesota to count ballots beyond, to receive ballots that are in the mail beyond the election day. When voters are asked, as they did in this Pew Research Center poll, are they going to vote by ballot? I mean, are they going to vote by mail, or are they going to vote in person? There's a clear Biden preference among voters who will vote by mail. Look at that, 69 to 27. And a clear Trump bias, if you would, for election day, 63 to 31. Which leads the president very much to say that he has problems with elections that aren't decided on election night. Yet Democrats are doubling down on pre-election voting. And just this morning, Michelle Obama, or maybe yesterday, but it was published today, Michelle Obama and LeBron James of the world champion LA Lakers said they're going to do a number of things to help early voting. including having concerts, including a whole lot of things to encourage people to gather and go through the lines. The ballots so far in are favoring Democrats by registration. We don't know how they're voting as they're coming in. A CBS poll, I think, also confirms what the Pew poll showed, a clear Democratic support among early voters. Still, the administration is talking about the potential for foreign mail vote fraud, that foreign governments will start mailing in bogus ballots. Yet the FBI director has not found any signs that has occurred or any intelligence that suggests that may occur. Vice President Biden is now talking about potential chicanery at polling stations through Mr. Trump's embrace of having unofficial groups be poll watchers, perhaps even militia groups being poll watchers. Which brings back memories in California to efforts to restrict the Hispanic vote in the 1980s that led to a consent decree against the Republican National Committee never to have such overt poll watching in the future. Yesterday, it was reported that the Republican parties put out drop-off boxes that are unofficial, such as in front of gun stores, to assist voters to put their ballots in. The Democratic Attorney General in California said that was against election law. Republicans cite other laws that suggest that maybe it is possible. What a controversy they have at this late stage. And who would want to put their ballot in an unofficial drop-off box? So let's end by discussing this. How likely do you think election day voting will be a major problem? And do you think the president's campaign is going to be successful in limiting Mr. Biden's supporters showing up on election day? Anyone want to speak on that topic?
I have Jean Brown.
Go for it.
I have some current data that might be interesting. This is from the Orange County perspective. It's from the Orange County Register. And you know, the unique thing this year is that, of course, every registered voter got a ballot, so you can get a lot of demographics from that.
Yep.
As of yesterday, 4% of the ballots sent to Orange County have been returned and processed, not counted, but processed. The data they can come from that is this is a pretty even state. If you divide between the Democrats, the Independents, and the Republicans, all within a pretty good area of having the same thing, an equal amount. The Democrats have returned a little bit more than the others. Demographically, the 50 to 64 and the 35 to 49 age groups are the largest in Orange County, really followed by the 65 age group, which has returned more than any of the other groups. And lastly, they can also divide it up or could realize what the ethnic background is in California, in Orange County, and it's certainly predominantly white. It's over 1 million white, over 360,000 Latino, 300,000 Asian, and the Black population is only 10,000. So I just found this a very interesting thing as an offshoot of what the information that we're getting, and because of everybody getting a ballot. And it's going to be interesting to follow this as we go on, because this just started, what, a few days ago.
Okay, good to hear. Good information.
Good idea.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you very much. What a election it's been. And we got 3 more weeks of this.
Thanks,
Okay.
Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.